The character of Spider-Man has arguably reached a level of mainstream popularity beyond anything we have ever seen before, thanks to the multiple unique takes on the character colliding across the entire multiverse to give us all something to cheer for.
We've got 3 different cinematic versions of Peter Parker, all who shared the screen in one glorious movie. We've got the animated adventures of Miles Morales, giving us an entire Spider-Verse of possibilities. The sheer volume of quality Spider-Man goodness that's currently available to all of us is staggering. And while there have certainly been some excellent Spider-Man games over the years across multiple platforms, I'm not sure if there's ever been a better time to release one than right now, with the fires of wall-crawling fandom stoked to an all-time high.
While riding this wave of excitement is certainly any gaming publisher's dream scenario, Spider-Man 2 had a lot of hype to live up to. The world was kind of expecting this to be the greatest Spider-Man game of all time. No pressure.
Part of the challenge for this Spider-Man game is that it exists in its own unique part of the Spider-Man multiverse. This is not the same Spider-Man that's shown up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the Spider-Verse movies, even if some of the scenarios are going to feel pretty similar. And the villains hail from the same classic rogues gallery that have played Peter and his friends for decades, paying proper homage to the portions of the Spider-Man journey that align with our expectations, while also finding creative ways to subvert some of those expectations is a delicate and challenging balance.
While every version of Spider-Man is truly a unique individual, part of the fun of seeing these somewhat similar storylines play out across multiple versions of media is uncovering how each diverse version of Spidey handles the various pressures and decisions thrust upon them.
It seems that no matter which multiverse we end up in, the person inhabiting our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man's powers will face some version of a mad scientist who has 8 arms. There will always be a Norman Osborn to make life more difficult, and at some point, a symbiotic creature will arrive and ensure that things get super weird. And while watching these scenarios play out on the big screen has been a dream come true for a lifelong Spider-Man like myself, it's completely different to take the controller into my hands and actually accomplish these stunning feats myself. For this game to truly work and live up to the legacy of what's been built so far, the developers of the game had to be consistent with what makes the character of Spider-Man so timelessly relatable, and then also make them relevant as a unique, playable, personal adventure for us to enjoy.
The task to take something so familiar and make it still feel just as powerful and epic the 100th time around is a tough challenge, and not just for Spider-Man.
As a lifelong fan of the Bible, I must confess I've reached a level of familiarity with some of the stories that it contains, to the point that I've almost ceased to see the supernatural in them. I know, that sounds terrible, but let's just be honest with each other, okay? When David picks up those 5 smooth stones, do we all still get the same level of goosebumps thinking about the nearly unwinnable battle he's about to face? Or does our knowledge that Goliath is going to fall make this seem a little less remarkable, more of a foregone conclusion each time we read it? Over the years of reading and rereading these events, some of these epic moments feel more like a formality than a miracle. I know that David will soundly defeat Goliath. I know that Daniel is going to be safely pulled out of that lion's den. I know Daniel's 3 friends are going to walk out of that fiery furnace without ever smelling like smoke. Hundreds of nearly impossible prophecies are going to come true. A virgin will give birth. Jesus is going to march right out of that empty tomb every time I read it. Much to my shame, I've slowly become desensitized to the miraculous provision that the Lord has shown his obedient followers. I know he provides manna in the wilderness because I know how that story ends. And as I become more familiar with his incredible displays of power, the inevitability of his faithfulness over each of those unique circumstances causes me to kind of glance over them with a sense of expectation rather than stand in awe of his omnipotence.
And yet, when it comes to the giants, fiery furnaces, and sealed tombs I face in my own life, I consistently struggle to see the same inevitability in his faithfulness to me. I panic, I worry, I stress way too much, and I wonder if he will show up this time.
66 books of the Bible, countless displays of his care and concern for his children over thousands of years. And it's still hard for me to transfer my knowledge of his steadfast love into my day-to-day life, because my giants seem a little less interesting than Goliath. My fiery furnaces are actually kind of more of the we just need the AC fixed variety. And the closed doors that I face in life aren't tombs that contain my Savior. They're simply the places I buried my own personal hopes and dreams. My problems they feel a little too local, too small, or they lack what I feel is importance to the Lord's global plan. So while I know and believe all of these stories of providence and power throughout the Bible, I fail to apply the lessons from them to my own personal experience. And if that's something you can relate to, well, let's jump into some Spider-Man sized boots and see what we need to do about it.
If we want to truly walk in the faith that we profess, then we must accept the inevitability of two things. There will be weapons formed against us, and these weapons will not prosper.
The existence of giants, lions, fiery furnaces, impossibilities, and sealed tombs are a foregone conclusion. Now, mine will look a little different than yours, and all of ours will look a little different than what we find in the scriptures. The giant we face probably won't be named Goliath. I don't think too many people are even using that as a name for their kids anymore, to be honest. It doesn't have a great history to it. But that giant might be named something a lot more personal. Perhaps that giant's name is cancer, divorce, depression, unemployment, homelessness, or addiction.
No matter what giant we are facing, here's the good news. The Lord, who has been faithful in the big things, like sending his son to be born of a virgin, die, and then you return to life, those kind of big things, is the same Father who will be endlessly faithful in what we perceive as the smaller things, like health, family, work, etc., that make up our own personal battlefields.
Now, yes, we do have a responsibility to pick up our controller and play our part in the game. David still had to march into a war zone in unprecedented fashion. He had to pick up his own ammunition and engage in that battle. For Daniel and his friends, they did have to stand tall in their faith against an evil decree and willingly face execution for those decisions.
Ruth stepped out in faith to believe in a God that hadn't promised her any kind of happy ending to her tragedies. But here's the part that we cannot afford to miss. In these moments, they weren't simply living out some story, nor did they know how these events would reach their conclusion.
The most likely ending for each of them is that they were going to suffer, and then in most of these cases, die, in an excruciatingly painful and public fashion. And their faith in the Lord to willingly march through the fire and the flames and demonstrate their steadfast desire to obey Him in those circumstances, even if He didn't choose to intervene, is when the Lord did what He always does. He showed up. So now it's time for us to pull these webs together.
As I reflect on my own struggle to relate the miraculous provisions of the Lord throughout the Bible to His obedient children with my own much smaller and less world-altering problems, I have come to a realization that made my spidey sense tingle. David, Ruth, Daniel, Esther, Mary, Job, and all the rest had no idea at the time that they were facing these giants, that these adventures would become iconic stories of faith.
Mary was just a random, pregnant, unmarried teenager. David was nothing more than a shepherd boy who occupied the lowest position in his own family's house. He got the worst seat at the table. Ruth was a childless, homeless, immigrant widow. That's not normally a recipe for becoming a heroic character. Job was a sick, bankrupt guy he had a wife whose encouragement to him was curse God and die. I don't know if you can relate to that one. If you can, man, that's a rough one. None of these individuals understood that they were in a Bible story. They were just living out their personal, private, painful existences in their own local way. Until God showed up and did what only He can do. And as I reflect on my day-to-day challenges, my story doesn't feel like it's as big as theirs. I'm just an ordinary dude, struggling to live a small and simple life, unsure of why the Lord would bother showing up in my battles that are decidedly smaller in scale.
But it's not the name or size of our giants that determine the Lord's interest or involvement in our battles. It is in His divine character to save His children, so that's what He does.
The larger-than-life adventures of Spider-Man on the big screen are part of the draw of his persona. In each iteration of Spider-Man, we find a soul that is in way over their head, against forces beyond their comprehension, engaging in battles that are only winnable because of a miraculous gift that they received.
When I bring this adventure home on my personal gaming console, I don't worry if my video game version of Spider-Man will lack any of his iconic powers. As soon as I boot up the game, I have complete confidence that I will be slinging webs, climbing walls, taking death-defying dives, and bringing down the villains that threaten my city.
My personal at-home version of Spider-Man may not be identical 100% of the way to the one that's in the IMAX theaters, but the powers that fuel his journey and the destiny he's been given are the same. This is simply my localized version of Spider-Man. And while I should expect that I will face Venom, I'll interact with some version of Doc Ock, and I'll deal with at least one crazy Osborn during this journey, I can also rest assured that I will be carrying the benefits of that infamous spider bite with me into those battles. And if I can have faith that my smaller, more personal, at-home version of Spider-Man has access to all the same capabilities as his bigger screen brethren, then perhaps it's not that my faith in the Lord is small. I'm simply failing to apply it in the correct direction, demonstrating my confidence in his past exploits with an almost casual demeanor, while overlooking his ability to act in my present circumstances.
Here's the encouragement that I'm speaking to myself as much as to anyone else who is hearing this. The same Lord who showed up in a lion's den, a fiery furnace, in the shadow of a giant, and in the sealed tomb has not changed.
But he is also the same Lord who took time out of his day to turn water into wine just to protect an unnamed couple's wedding day. He miraculously provided a needed income tax payment through a coin in a fish's mouth. And he demonstrated a desire to heal the bodies and souls of those in need well outside of the public's eye, just because he wanted to help them. And if we need a reminder of who he is, as well as how much we mean to him, we need to recall that he cares enough about the birds of the air and the flowers of the field to clothe and care for them individually. And we're worth infinitely more to him than any of those.
Let's read about the lives of those who serve the Lord without any promises that he would show up on their behalf a little differently. He didn't promise to David that he would only need one of those rocks, and he never guaranteed Esther that she would survive her encounter with her enemies.
He didn't deliver flame-retardant pajamas to Daniel's friends, and he never made any promises to Ruth that she would ever see the light at the end of her tunnel or be part of a Lifetime movie. He just showed up in his perfect time, and he still shows up today the exact same way.
Our Spider-Man 2 journey will be made up of some story beats that every Spidey fan over the years will remember and appreciate, as well as contain new content that will deviate from the formula that has been so successful in previous comics, movies, and games.
But the essence of what makes the Spider-Verse so familiar and enjoyable will always be the same. Friends and foes may appear a little bit differently. Storylines might see a slight variance. The way that you choose to complete the missions in the game might occur in a different order than my playthrough of the exact same game. But we are all Spider people here, with a shared destiny to fulfill, similar pains to endure, and the same source of power to propel us through our adventures. And as I look over the ways that the Lord has shown his love, power, and grace to his children over the years, I realize that my familiarity with these Bible stories shouldn't make them feel less powerful. They should remind me that I am part of a multiverse of believers who have endured journeys that are both similar and unique, facing giants who carry different names, but share the same goal of crushing us under their feet. Now, they didn't know it at the time, but their perseverance under fire would one day provide a foundation for the faith of many, including yours truly.
And who knows if the small, seemingly insignificant battles that we are each facing will serve a similar purpose to souls that we will never meet, a tale of the Lord's faithfulness in our impossible circumstances to encourage them through their challenges.
Just as every version of Spider-Man has found over the years, there may be small differences in the villains we face, and our specific gifts and missions may vary. But we're all part of the same family. The gift of the spider bite doesn't mean the absence of our problems, but the promise of divine protection against the worst that our enemies can throw at us. Our stories may see different permutations as we explore our unique Spider-Verses, but the unchanging, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent Lord at the center of our story unifies our narratives in one glorious, explosive, undeniable fact through the annals of time and beyond.
He is faithful in the big things, the small things, and everything in between, in every version of our Spider-Verse and beyond.